There's always plenty of activity on the Thames, but never more so, of course, than during last summer's Diamond Jubilee River Pageant in honour of Her Majesty the Queen. With over 1,000 boats involved, making sure things ran smooth and ship-shaped on the big day was no mean feat. Inside Out has been behind the scenes with the Port of London Authority to find out how they coped with the massive challenge of organising one of the biggest events in the river's history. Overlooking the Thames Barrier, this is the control room of the Port of London Authority. On a normal day here, they have to deal with as many as 150 boats.
Start Jubilee pageant is underway and making way.
But last year they put on a river pageant to celebrate the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. Early plans were quite modest, but then the Mayor of London went all extravagant.
There was a big meeting with Boris and there was about 60 boats involved at that time. Mainly all rowing boats, just on a very small flotilla upriver, and that was it. I was sitting in City Hall waiting for Boris to make the big public announcement for the first time, and it comes out 1,000 boats.
I have never been so stressed in all my life. I'm a pilot. I've worked as a pilot here for 15 years. Basically I drive ships. I have been at sea for 40 years since being an apprentice. And never in my wildest nightmares did I ever dream I would be doing something like that. I normally deal with one ship at a time. Dealing with 1,000 was a bit like taking the same problems and putting 3 noughts on the end of it.
1,000 boats were to sail in from all over the world. Over a year before, they had to organise parking spaces for them all.
The logistics and the planning that went into making sure that it all fitted together, that was where the biggest nightmare was. Most of the moorings that we put in for the vessels are not there normally. There's about 3 miles of chain, and the amount of weight that we actually put them moorings into place was equivalent of 53 London buses. And it took 2 months to put these moorings into place. Completely unprecedented.
The main attraction would surely be one boat, the Spirit of Chartwell. Usually a floating hotel was to house the star of the show. With the whole world watching, nothing could be left to chance.
The biggest boat in the pageant was the one Her Majesty was on, and it had to get underneath some very low bridges, and I had to be very careful with the tide that it could fit, remembering of course who was on the top of it? Her Majesty. I could well see shortage of medals had I knocked her head off. The tide moves here 5 metres up and down. Yeah, get it wrong and boats hit bridges.
The plans quickly turned into rehearsals, and this was when the boats came in. With some owners having little knowledge of the tidal Thames, those that did left nothing to chance.
The rehearsals started back in 2011, which involved as many boats as could make it getting together and proceeding in flotilla formation down the River Thames from Hammersmith down to West India Dock. 2 days before, we went up into West India Dock, everybody met there, and we had a briefing the evening before the pageant.
Boats of all shapes and sizes took part. Beautiful old sailing barges, working vessels, and leading the flotilla over 200 man-powered boats that had to be able to keep up a speed of 4 knots over 7 miles.
The pageant office put out an entry form, and it went out all over the world, inviting people with boats to enter. And we, looking at our database from the Great River Race and other events we've done, said, well, these can maintain the 4 knots. These are the traditional Thames skiffs. But there were everything from the new Queen's Row barge, Gloriana, 90 foot long, right down to little 8-foot dinghies. Dragon boats, gondolas came from Venice. The Waka, the New Zealand war canoe with a crew from New Zealand. Canadian canoes from Canada, came from all over the world to take part.
A British water pageant just wouldn't be right without the Dunkirk little ships. Known for rescuing troops in their thousands during the Second World War. They're used to sailing in convoy.
The Dunkirk Little Ships every 5 years do a reenactment of the return to Dunkirk. We leave from Ramsgate and head over to Dunkirk. There are certainly some challenges crossing the shipping lanes, and we coordinate that very, very closely with the Maritime Coast Guard Agency. We also tend to have the assistance of the Royal Navy, which tends to help when you have a Royal Navy frigate situated between you and the supertankers. The challenge on the Thames is ultimately for this many boats, it's quite a narrow stretch of waterway. And you've got a lot of bridges, you have an awful lot of boats, and if anyone had a problem, the real challenge was ensuring that they could be either pulled out of the procession or the problem could be fixed quickly enough that it didn't affect a whole lot of other boats.
Taking part wasn't going to be a cruise down the river for some. At the man-powered sections briefing, it was made very clear what would happen to them if they didn't row quick enough.
The front of the fleet is 7 minutes ahead of the back of the fleet, and that is never going to change. If you find yourself 8 minutes behind the front of the fleet, it is because you are being towed, okay? And you're being towed in front of 3.5 million people, sorry, 3.5 billion, demonstrating that you are not able to manage to row your boat a little above walking pace, okay?
As it turned out, it wasn't a rower whose worst nightmare occurred.
I got my position, started moving off, and the engine stopped. I had to go on the VHF immediately, saying my engine had backed up. The PLA came alongside, pulled me out. And that was the end of my pageant.
Luckily, Madam was the only motorboat to conk out on the day. With a little help from the Environment Agency, agreeing to close the Thames barrier for a conveniently timed safety check, the river stayed relatively calm. The 3 miles of chain made sure the boat started on time. No rowers got left behind, the Queen didn't lose her head, and the whole thing looked like a Canaletto painting. But what we never noticed on the day was the guys who organised it were amongst the boats choreographing the whole thing.
I heard over the radio, the harbour master said, "Pageant, go," and I gave a loud hail call out to the whole flotilla, "Okay everyone, let's go for a paddle." And 275 boats started rowing and paddling. It was absolutely fantastic.
All the boats had to be close together, and very few seafarers actually like doing that. So it was a case of continually, come on, close up, close up.
There was no answering back. They all did as they was told, which is quite hard for a master of a boat, because a master of a boat is the guy that's in charge of their own boat. So they're actually taking advice from someone else, which is quite challenging in itself.
Everybody got home safely. Still get emotional about it. It was a culmination of months and months of work, but it all came together.
I reckon Old Father Thames would have absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it, but would have been saying, you pushed the boundaries there a bit.